You are listening to the Dare to Love podcast with your hosts, Sonica Tinker and Christian Peterson, founders of Love. Hi, everybody. Welcome to the podcast. This is Christian speaking today. I'm glad you joined. Today, I want to talk about what we think of as being too nice. If I were to ask you, are you someone who's nice? Are you someone who's maybe too nice when it comes to your relationship, or maybe everywhere in your life, at your workplace, with your kids, anywhere really where you travel through your life? Sometimes this is thought of as being a flexible person or being a generous person. And it's an unwitting mistake many of us make in relationship. And it's a decision at some point, conscious or unconscious, to kind of put a lid on some of my desires and my needs and my wants. It's like I rein in my own desires or my big dreams because I don't want to trigger my partner. I don't want them to think that I'm too demanding. I don't want to cause a stir. I don't want to trigger my partner. I think I already said that, but you know what I mean? Or, because I'm convincing myself that it's not appropriate for me to go for what I want or to speak up about the things I want. So I don't. See if you can relate to any of these examples, because just this week we have been coaching with several different people who are in totally different situations, but they have this same predicament. So here's a couple of examples, and then we'll dive in some more. The first one is a woman, we'll call her Anna. So she definitely thinks there's something wrong with her because she doesn't want to marry the man she's been dating for almost a year. Because when she thinks about it, he's actually a really good guy. He's loyal and responsible and on time and kind, which is all in stark contrast to her ex, who was a liar and, at least ended up being a liar and a cheater and is demeaning her and, very stark contrast to her ex. This man, her boyfriend now, he really wants to marry her. He really wants to make a life together, have children, the whole package. He's very gung-ho about it. Anna, however, is not so sure. She has doubts about it, and she's telling herself, well, I shouldn't be doubting this. It's a no-brainer, right? But why is it that in actuality she doesn't really want to marry this guy? But, so she's saying to herself, but I should, right? Because it makes sense. He's such a good guy. He's loyal and responsible. It just makes sense. And she really wants to make him happy as well. And frankly, she's kind of enamored with the fact that he's enamored with her enough that he wants to get married. So that's our first example. Our next example is from a gentleman. We'll call him Anthony. So Anthony he's damping down or putting a lid on his own desire for sex in many different ways. By, for example, not acknowledging his need for it in the moment when he notices his desire. He's doing this by trying to talk himself out of wanting it, or by minimizing its importance. He'll say things to himself or to his partner like, yeah, okay, it's not that big of a deal. Yeah, no problem. We'll do it tomorrow. It's not like my life depends on it. Yeah, we can, we'll do it some other time. I'm going to be fine. Don't worry about it. You might relate to that kind of conversation in your own mind or with your partner or somebody. He does it he puts a lid on his own desire by not even initiating sex or touch with his partner. He does it by backing off at the first sign of discomfort or refusal from her side. He'll immediately back off and, say to her or himself, yeah, no problem, don't worry about it. Yeah, I don't want to make you uncomfortable. And by simply routinely putting his partner's needs ahead of his own, and often he ends up with, not getting his desires. So, and the last example I'll mention here in the beginning is, we'll call him Robert. Obviously, these aren't their real names. The stories we are telling are real from the people we have coached with, and obviously we always change names and details to maintain the anonymity and privacy of the people we're talking about. So here we'll call him Robert. He is in the he is in the throes of divorce, and his wife is leaving him, and he's not wanting to save it. They're divorcing, and he's discovering in the process of this divorce that he really doesn't know much at all about what he wants. For so long, around 30 years, he has been going along with his wife's desires and demands and wants, and simply lost touch with his own feelings and desires and dreams. During their marriage, it became second nature for him to just let her desires be their desires. And whenever he did want something different from her, to 9 times out of 10 to just let it slide, because in his own words, he said it was just easier that way. Now, in each of these 3 examples we just gave you from Anna and Anthony and Robert, you could make the case that they are being generous. They're more concerned with making sure that their partners get what they want. You could say they are being flexible because they're not attached to having things exactly their way. You could even make the point that they're like born peacemakers who value harmony more than getting whatever it is they want for themselves. We could even, we even could call them really spiritual people, in the sense that they don't put so much emphasis on their own preference. You might have heard the quote said, I think it's from the Buddhist tradition, but I'm honestly not sure. The quote is, "The great way is easy for those who have no preferences." Which means if I don't have a certain preference for whether we have sex or not, hey, then it's not a big deal whether we do or not, right? And just this week, I read a great article on mindbodygreen.com that said the most important ingredient of a lasting relationship is generosity. And I don't disagree with that one bit. Generosity is absolutely essential for a successful relationship. However, in the examples that I just shared, our clients here, our friends, it's really not that they're being generous. I know you could also say that they're being so nice. So whenever say Anthony wants to have sex and his partner doesn't, he's being nice enough that he says, "Don't worry about it, honey," because he's nice, right? Or maybe generous, or maybe flexible. But in reality, it's not actually generosity. It's I want to put a big emphasis under that. I'm not suggesting any of the people we're talking about are not generous people. Like I know for a fact that they are all nice and flexible and generous people who want the best things for themselves and for their partners. The problem here is that what appears to be generosity or flexibility or being nice, in reality, it's much more an avoidance of trouble, or a fear of rejection, or a lack of courage and power to stand up for oneself. Or in some cases, it's flat out laziness. Like in Robert's example, he even said it himself. It was just easier to go along with what his wife wanted than it was to, stand up for whatever it was he wanted. And certainly there are some portions of this that is indeed genuine flexibility, or in some cases it's simply that he might not have had any strong preference for whatever it was she was wanting. That's totally fine. But in the cases where he actually did want something in particular and didn't go for it or stand up for it, there's a price to pay, because there's always a long-term price to pay for the short-term gain of not making trouble, by letting your own desires slide. That's what he's getting, is a great example of what Robert was saying. The short-term gain here is, I got to not have any trouble. I got to not have an argument. I got to not take the time to go through the steps that are required to figure out how to deal with when you want sex and I don't, or the vice versa, or when you want to send our kids to one school and I want to send them to another school, or what we're having for dinner, or what movie we're going to watch. It doesn't matter what the example is. So there's a short-term gain that is, I get a little peace and quiet right now. But there's always a long-term price to pay whenever you damp down your own feelings, or you shut off your own desires to avoid upset or conflict in a relationship. when you don't stay engaged, when you don't go for what you want, when you don't create win-wins that work for both you and your partner or workmate or whoever it is that you're in relationship with, there's you literally you set yourself up for breakdown, and ultimately you risk the stability of your relationship, and you risk your self-respect and the courage to go for whatever it is that's important to you in life, because no one can stay disconnected from themselves and their feelings and their passions for a prolonged period of time without the potential consequence of just wanting to break free from what then seems like an imprisoned experience in your relationship in the attempt to go, find themselves again. In other words, like the ongoing practice of negating your own desires and dreams will create resentment. It's just a matter of how long it'll take. You are listening to the Dare to Love podcast with your hosts, Sonika Tinker and Christian Peterson, founders of LoveWorks. And I want to admit and validate right up front here that this is tricky stuff, because pretty much every person I know, and certainly all the ones we're talking about here, and this is true for me, no doubt, we truly are and want to be and strive to be generous people, flexible people, easily communicative people, nice. I'm a nice person. I prefer nice, easy conversation over heated, intense, yelling conversation. I do any day of the week. There's no doubt about that. And it's tricky because who can't relate to, you want something that might trigger your partner. So, you kind of weigh it before you say anything, especially if you've been with someone for a while and you know what may or may not trigger them. So whenever you notice that you want something that involves the other person, you weigh it in your mind, and it's really easy to just go, is it really that important? Maybe not. I'll be fine. Just like I said, Anthony was saying about, when his partner was saying no to sex, we have this little conversation in our mind that goes, it's not that important. It's not like my life is on the line here. I'll be totally fine, right? So it's just very easy to let it slide and not speak up about it. And for a while, typically, it's totally fine. It works out great. It's not that big of a deal, except until it isn't. Because how so this is a question we often get, how do you find the balance between being genuinely generous and genuinely nice person on the one side, and on the other side, going for and insisting on getting what you want and what you need? And there's no scientific formula for where you step this line or for where this line is. But I'll tell you a certain way, pretty much a surefire way you can know when you're not standing up enough for what you want is when you begin to feel pissed off or resentful. Again, Robert is a good example of this. He inadvertently put his own desires on the sideline with pretty much everything, at least so he says himself. It was like where they went on holidays, when they took their holidays, when they didn't go on holidays, who they were visiting with, who they were hanging out with, for how long, what color to paint the house, like I mentioned, what school to send their kids to, where to invest their money, whether or not to make retirement accounts, you name it. Like her preference just became their preference. And like I said, for the longest time, this worked just fine for him. But now that he's divorcing, and he's looking back at his 30-year marriage in retrospect, he's resentful in retrospect that he always got, in quotes, steamrolled. And as we were doing coaching, he had the profound realization that he went along with her desires literally because it was easier. And so, like I said, one way you know that you have been doing this too much, that you're not standing up enough for your own desires and what you need and what you want, is when you begin to feel angry and resentful. And one of the other things that makes this tricky and makes it tricky to find this balance is, like with Robert's example, in always letting her desire just take preference. He actually believed that he was being loving and doing her a favor. He believed he was, a great contribution to the peace in their house because he wasn't causing a stir, causing trouble. He believed he was being easygoing and flexible, and that's a good human quality, and that she would love him even more for it because he was acting like this. But guess what actually happened? And I'm guessing many of you will be able to relate to this. She didn't love him more for it. As a matter of fact, the quite opposite happened. She lost respect for him. And not only that, he lost respect for himself. And he totally lost touch with what he actually wanted about almost every aspect of his life. To be, to put it a little bluntly, he had chickened out on his own dreams and desires for so long, he ended up not trusting himself to go for what he wanted. And that is a big part of what we are now changing in the coaching that I'm doing with him, is to help him regain his confidence, his access, easy access to what he wants, what feels right, that thing we might call intuition or gut feeling, and to have the confidence and the courage to go for it without being a jerk about it, because this is something that often plays into it. And I want to say I see this predominantly with men, but not exclusively, is that men often end up, this is what gave rise to the term back, 15, 20 years ago, the terms of a Mr. Nice Guy is, for one, there's a genuine desire to be nice. Sure. Many of us have that. But more than that, it's a fear of our own intensity and our own power and the strong masculine energy that runs in us. And, we all have seen through our lives, through the media, through history, we all have seen what masculine energy can do when it's not guided with a kind hand. There is no lack of evidence. You don't have to look very far to see the results of men who aren't being nice, right? You can find any level of mayhem and rape and pillage and stealing and murdering and violence and demeaning of families and destroying each other, right? You just look at any newspaper, whether it's today or 500 years ago. We have so much evidence that what happens when men aren't being nice. So us nice men now, we have a great desire to not be anything like those violent jerks. But in the process, we whittle or put a lid so hard on our power so as not to make our partners mad at us, or so as not to scare them, that we end up doing exactly what I've been mentioning in these examples, is being so nice that we always put our own desires and dreams on the sideline or on the back burner, or just let them go altogether. So you can imagine Robert being surprised in that, well, why wouldn't she love me more? Why wouldn't she think I'm awesome, given that I give her everything she wants? Whenever she says something, I'm like, sure, no problem. I don't even make a fuss about nothing. So I offered him this. I offered him this analogy or this image. You can imagine from her point of view, and maybe you have been in his wife's shoes many times or with someone. From her point of view, his easygoingness, or his always saying, sure, no problem, whatever you want, it actually made her feel alone. It's like every time she would offer up an idea, instead of having a sparring partner that she could create some energetic communication with, he just showed up as this, it's like an amorphous blob without any distinctions or boundaries or edges, like a bowl of jelly. Or you can imagine if you stick your hand out and you want to lean on something, a tree. It's very satisfying when you lean yourself on a big solid oak tree because it has some mass to it and it feels safe when you lean on it. But if you think it's a solid tree, but it totally isn't, it's rotted and weak, you're just going to fall right through it and it's not satisfying at all. Same with, you can imagine her, whenever she suggests an idea, it's a little bit like wanting a sparring partner. Sometimes I poke a little at you, you poke a little at me. And I mean poke in a good way, in the way that is, hey, I feel you're over there and you feel me over here. And we're doing something together, even if it's just talking about what movie we're going to see. There is some satisfaction in having a little interaction about, oh yeah, I'd really love to see the new Avengers movie. No, how about we watch this new comedy instead? And, you get to spar a little. But instead, if your partner is like Robert, by his own admission, often was, it's like there's nothing. It's like a bag of air or a bowl of jelly. There's nothing to push against. There's nothing to play with. There's nothing to spar with. So in partnership, it produces safety and connection when you can put your hand, either physically or metaphorically through communication, put your hand on your partner and you can feel there's some substance there. It's not just, a bowl of jelly or a bag of air. So at the end, by his easygoingness and always saying, sure, honey, no problem, she ended up losing respect for him. He ended up losing respect for himself, and he never got what he really wanted, And it's only after it's over now that he's realizing, oh yeah, it actually was important to me. All these things were actually important to me that has to do with our sex life and our kids and where we traveled to and our work life. There was all these things were important to me, but I just didn't really say anything because it was easier. So generosity and being nice and easygoing, those are all amazing qualities in a human being, and they're great qualities. And with generosity and kindness, they're absolutely crucial qualities in a relationship, at least any successful, loving, lasting relationship. But self-sacrifice to the extent of you not getting what you want, that's something else entirely, and it is not productive. I mean, you don't get what you want, but it also isn't, you're not doing any favors for your partner or your relationship. Like even the article I quoted a little earlier from Mind Body Green, it even had that, it first talked about how generosity is the most essential ingredient for a lasting, successful relationship. But it also said in one of the bullet points below it that giving, I'm quoting in quotes here, giving until it hurts or trying to buy affection does not develop a healthy relationship. It does not take the place of caring for yourself or expecting your partner to do her or his part, unquote. And then, another problem that shows up with this is that it's really easy to get mad at your partner when you don't get what you want. It is very tempting for Anne, in the example I mentioned above, she was the one who, was trying to talk herself out of having doubts about getting married. Her boyfriend really wants to get married. It's really easy for her to get mad at him for pushing the marriage agenda and keep bringing it up. For Anthony, the example I mentioned with him wanting to have sex and often not getting what he wants in that domain, it's really easy. It almost seems logical for him to get mad at his partner for not being more into sex, for not just saying yes more. And I want to add a little side note here. Is there are many effective and productive and loving and great ways to bring a conversation like that directly to your partner. There are many great ways to do that, but I won't go into that in this particular podcast because that's not what I want our focus to be on here. I want to instead offer you the opportunity that whenever this happens, let's say you feel all of a sudden you notice you get resentful or pissed off that you're not getting what you want. And you might even in your mind have thoughts like, I'm being so nice, but he or she isn't reciprocating. I'm being so flexible, but he's not. I'm all generous with how much I give, but she's not giving back to me. I'm just the only one giving around here. You are listening to the Dare to Love podcast with your hosts, Sonika Tinker and Christian Peterson, founders of LoveWorks. I want to offer you the opportunity to take it to yourself first. And then later, we can worry about how you bring a conversation like this directly to your partner. But for now, just deal with your portion of this equation, which is, where aren't you going for what you want? Where do you let go of your own desires for whatever reason? Like where don't you go for stuff that actually, if you're being honest, really is important to you? Where do you just, let it happen that you don't get what you want? Where do you say, it's okay, don't worry about it? Where do you say, it's not really that important? Or where do you say, it's not a matter of life and death? And, you let it slide, even though it actually is important to you. So you can ask yourself questions like, where am I not going for what I want? You can get more specific if you like. Say, where am I not going for what I want at work? Where am I not going for what I want with my partner? Where am I not going for what I want with my health? If you want to get even more specific, you can apply it to specific domains like that. Where am I not going for what I want? You can ask yourself, where am I settling? Like several of the examples of the clients we mentioned here, they might very well see that they are settling in their relationships here. Another great question to ask yourself is, where am I holding myself back from my dreams and my passion and my aliveness? Where am I holding myself back? Here's the next question, where do I, in quotes, forget? Deliberately or not deliberately, where do I forget what I want and need in the interest of, peacemaking, taking care of my partner, or making someone else's happy, or in the interest of being nice? Where do I conveniently forget, we might say, what I want and need? And here's the last question I want to encourage you to ask yourself. Write it down, even if you're someone if it helps you to write the stuff down, do it on paper. But if not, just in your mind or speak it out loud. What am I afraid would happen if I stood up for what I want and for what I need? I'm going to say that again. What am I afraid would happen if I stood up for what I want and for what I need? What are you afraid might happen? And, in the coaching I've gotten to do with Robert, for example, like he's seeing that very clearly. What he was afraid would happen are actually quite a few things. One is, that she would get mad, that he wouldn't be able to handle her getting mad, that he wouldn't be able to handle having, heated exchanges. He was afraid of not getting what he wanted, that he would basically fail in his endeavor to go for what he wanted. He was afraid it would cause a rift so deep that, they might not be able to repair it, and so on and so forth. But instead, as you have gathered from what I've shared so far, it doesn't get you what you want either to just be nice about it and let the other person have what they want. And, often there's another flaw here that I'm not going to go too deep into it because it pertains to also to the how do you bring conversations like these directly to your partner or someone else. But that's, the idea that, and most people actually, even though this sounds very simple and straightforward, most people we interact with, and I certainly used to be one of them, we don't actually move as if we can both have what we want. It always seems like this either or, if you don't want to have sex right now, we're not going to have sex, right? It's an either or. We can't both not have sex and have sex. Or, you want to go to the Orcas Islands for vacation, but I really want to go to Hawaii. We can't do both, right? All these things, they seem like such either or propositions. So if our partner, for example, has a strong preference for one thing, it's very easy for us to just say, yeah, okay, whatever. Because underlying premise being we're both not going to get what we want, so I'll just yield. But that's a bad misconception. Sonika and I, in our work, we consequently go for and operate on the belief that we can both have what we want. You can both have what you want, you and your partner, or you and your partner and your 3 kids. You can come up with something that works for all of you. And, we have always practiced this with our kids, between ourselves. It sometimes takes a different kind of, sometimes a different kind of communicating skill or a different kind of creativity in order to find the solutions that satisfy all of us. But it's so freaking worth it to find solutions that satisfy both you and me. I mean, you can imagine, I've shared some of the consequences of what happens when one person sits there, when one person doesn't get what he or she wants, basically, for a long time. What is the end result of that? It's instability, it's arguing, it's disconnection, it's relationships that don't make it, it's divorce. Because if we don't get what we want for a long period of time, we're going to try to break out of that situation and fix it elsewhere. So going for what I want doesn't mean that I don't want you to have what you want. The upside here, what we're going for is for you to find your own clarity about what you want, have easy access to knowing what you want, and the power and the courage and the sense of worthiness to stand up for what you want as well as what your partner wants. So it's like you're saying, and this Sonika and I actually put this, what I'm about to share is in our definition, that's a part of the definition of a successful, loving relationship or marriage. Like we have this in our vows with each other that it goes something like, I deserve to have what I want, and you deserve to have what you want. I want you to have your needs met. I want you to be happy, and I want that for me too. I'm not going to sacrifice my needs to satisfy your needs, but I'm also not going to sacrifice your needs to satisfy mine. Yours are as important as mine. Mine are as important as yours. And we are both going to get what we want here. We are in a relationship. That's one of the reasons why we're in a relationship, is to help each other get everything we want. If we don't know how to accomplish that, we can learn. No problem. But we're not going to give up on both of us being satisfied and getting what we want. The price is just too high, even though one of us might feel like we won in the moment when I got what I wanted and you might not have. Even if you said, yeah, sure, no problem. And in the long run, neither of us win playing the game that way. And yes, I am well aware that often it is perfectly fine to be flexible. And it's totally okay with you to say, don't worry about it, honey. We'll do it your way. I often take great pleasure, as a matter of fact, in giving that to Sonika and say, hey, you'd like to go to see this show? Good example could be, in our life, could be going to musicals. I personally don't have much of a fancy for musicals, let's just say it in a diplomatic way, at all. All I can think about is, can they stop singing soon and just do something? Is there any action happening here? That's a little side note. But Sonika loves it. It makes her so happy. It just makes her so happy. And often, it's totally fine for me to say, hey, that's not my preference, but I would love to give that to you, that we're going to go to a musical. Great. That's a great example of a place where it's perfectly fine and generous, and I get to be genuinely generous and give my time and my sharing that experience with her, and she does that in a million different ways for me. How you know it's out of whack is when you begin to feel bad, resentful, angry. Resentment is typically the one that shows up first. Something is just cooking in you that isn't going away. You get irritated about your partner getting what they want or about doing something. That's when you need to stop and pay attention to, hang on a second. Am I just letting my own desires slide here? Is there a way that I'm just kind of like chickening out on standing up for what I want and what I need. And the last thing I'll say here before we wrap up is that is not to suggest, this is really important, and this is one of the reasons that many people don't stand up for what they want, is we don't want to be selfish. Hell, that's true for me. I don't want to be a selfish jerk. I don't want to take care of my needs over yours. I don't want to put myself first like that. So we just need to adjust how we think about that. Going for what I want does not mean I'm selfish at your expense. It simply means, like I just said, our declaration about marriage is I deserve to have what I want, and so do you. We're both going to get what we want. That's how we create a great relationship, is to have two happy people. And this is true if it's a relationship between a boss and an employee. How that relationship really works is when both of them feel satisfied, right? That's how it works between a husband and wife or boyfriend and girlfriend or any partners. When we both get what we want, we're humming. Like we can handle stuff. And if you don't know how to reach the point of, if you don't have the creativity or the skill yet to come up with solutions that satisfy both of you, don't worry about it. Take some time to learn how to do that. That's why people like Sonica and myself are in this world. That's why we offer workshops and, we both do individual coaching. You could talk to us or you can talk to someone else you trust about these things, but for a fact, you can learn how to do that. And I think the last thing I'll leave you with is, even if you haven't figured out how to do it yet, don't back off from what is important to you. Don't back off from what your heart's desires are, your dreams are, your wants and your needs. If sex is really important to you, don't back off and forget about it. If living in a certain place or in a certain manner is really important to you, don't back off from it. Instead, go looking for, how do we come up with solutions that takes care of me and you and our kids, if they're, and the other people that might be involved in this situation. So you deserve to get what you want. That is my stance. So do the people around you. Don't back off from what you want. And have fun with going, ask yourself these questions. If you were to just pick one of them, just ask this one. What am I afraid would happen if I stood up for what I want and for what I need? I wish you all the best with that. Thank you so much for tuning in here. This is Christian with the Dare to Love podcast. Look very forward to being with you next time. You have been listening to the Dare to Love podcast with Sonica Tinker and Christian Peterson, co-founders of LoveWorks. And hey, if you found this podcast to be valuable, would you hit the share button and go ahead and share this with your friends on Facebook, Twitter, or wherever your favorite hangouts are. Thanks so much for sharing the love.